Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 166.
We made it.
Yes, and here we are. It is the CCCP.
Oh, you're doing a... Wait, isn't CCCP? Isn't that the Russian thing?
It's Chinese Communist Party.
There you think you get it.
It's the Community Christian Church podcast.
That's
I'll do it.
CCCP.
That's what I said.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped listening once I knew you were doing an acronym.
I did it just to mess with you. Because you last week you were talking about acronyms.
I got what you were doing. I got what you were doing.
It's hilarious.
If you tag it that way, though, we might get some, Chinese viewers. They might
Maybe.
come in and start watching.
Maybe.
I also got distracted by the fact that in 500 episodes, when I'm no longer around, y'all will be at episode 666.
Watch
We'll
out.
do a celebration. That will be the best one ever. So we did come up, speaking of last week, if you were tuning in, Nathan dropped the acronym ASMR. And I figured out,
I'm just going to go ahead.
Sawyer helped me figure out what that means. It is Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response.
All right, randomly.
What does that mean?
I don't know, but
Nothing.
I randomly reached in this thing and pulled out the worst of all candies, Twizzlers.
Oh, I
Don't
like
eat it.
Twizzlers.
Don't eat it. You don't have to eat it.
I don't want to even hear why they like Twizzlers. I'm gonna eat it,
Okay.
but whoever.
How would you... I would like to hear how you describe why you like food that you like.
He doesn't know.
That's a good point.
I don't know how I would defend the food I like.
That's an excellent point, Nate.
I'll defend it. It tastes good.
Wow.
I like it.
Why don't you like it? It tastes bad. Well, that's our podcast. Thanks for coming this week, guys.
All right.
Come back next week when we talk about why the sun shines.
Ed, stop messing with the microphone.
ASMR.
Okay, ASMR is not beating the microphones.
Blasting out my eardrums does not constitute
What to say?
ASMR.
Okay. Are we sufficiently off the rails now?
This feels on the rails for us.
Okay, good.
It feels like we're just one
right,
wheel up.
OTR on the rails.
On the rails. Okay. We have a question, fellas.
Okay.
Ready?
No.
Well, doesn't
Hang
matter.
on.
Now you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. It seems like John the Baptist did not know Jesus, and vice versa. It also feels like John is prophesying well ahead of Jesus' ministry. But weren't they cousins, born only a few months apart? So what is the relationship between John the Baptist and Jesus? Did they know each other or not?
So here's the thing. If the person were sitting with me, I'd like to know, what's the indication to you that they didn't know each other?
That's what I
Yes.
was wondering.
I'm trying to think of where in the Bible
I think maybe, I'm guessing, maybe it's because of
in this issue. Did you ask this question?
no. There's that portion of scripture where John sends back word to Jesus through his disciples and
Okay.
says, "Hey, should we wait for somebody else? Are you the guy?" And maybe they assume that means he didn't know much about Jesus. But
Okay.
that's
Maybe.
yeah, maybe.
I mean, I get why someone could read it that way. That is not how I read that.
That's not how I read
question.
it.
And Jesus very clearly, even then, talks about, the highest of praise. He says,
Yeah.
there has never been a person born of women,
Yep.
which includes Jesus,
Yeah.
who is greater than John.
Yeah.
I think what they were looking for is they're looking for John the Baptist when he baptized Jesus to go, "Hey, cuz."
Yeah.
If he had just said, "Hey, cuz,"
Yeah.
and then baptized him, it would
So
have
if
been.
that's the thing of, they don't do a lot of, cousin inter. I think one of the big things that people may get confused by, or maybe not think about, Mary goes to see Elizabeth before they're born.
Mhm.
Okay, you remember that part? She finds out she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And then I think it's only Matthew that tells us she leaves and goes to, it's wherever the Magnificat is that we get the idea. She travels to this village. Well, when you look on a map, Mary pregnant with her child, it's 100 miles.
Wow.
It's further than she and Joseph go when they have to come to Bethlehem to have the baby. She travels 80 to 100 miles. Basically, her family is removing her from scorn.
Mhm.
That's it.
Yeah, they're getting.
Yeah.
She's pregnant. She's decided to have the baby, and we don't know if she goes alone. We're not told that. Maybe Joseph is with her even then.
Yeah.
But maybe somebody's with them. Here, I doubt very likely that a woman traveled that far by herself.
Yeah.
And so if John the Baptist family stays up there, and Mary and Joseph go back to Galilee for 30 years. I mean, we don't know how many times people make that trip.
Yeah.
Probably not much.
Not much. Yeah.
I mean, 100 miles to the. I have cousins, for instance, that are in the Dakotas. I've never met. I'm 63 years old. I wouldn't know them if they walked in this room right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe they didn't have much interaction growing up, but it seems to me from that they may not have hung out a lot, but they
Right.
are certainly aware of
they're aware of each other.
And you would think because they are in a family, and even if they didn't cross paths in childhood, then he probably heard the stories.
Oh, I bet he did.
And because that would have been told.
But
over and
on
over
both
again.
sides.
On both
I
sides.
bet Elizabeth told the
Yeah.
story and
Yeah.
Mary told the story.
Mhm.
And then when their ministry starts,
They are in the same area.
well, it eventually, but
Yeah.
if John starts earlier, John's doing his thing below Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
down around the Jordan. Jesus is in Galilee, so they're just they're not hanging out in the same neighborhood all the time. They're cousins, but they're not hanging out in the same place all the time.
And I think we've answered. I mean, I think for a lot, we kind of answered the question you asked of we don't know why, whether they knew how well they knew each other, what they knew. I think an important thing though to just make a point here about reading the Bible is I think often when people read the Bible, they're looking for it to read like a book. And what I mean is to be like a biography. And we'll even say that sometimes, kind of euphemistically, kind of referring to them as biographies. But they're not biographies in the sense that we mean. We think of like birth to tomb biographies where I'm getting every date of their life leading, and not just that, there'd be a chapter or two on John the Baptist because he's, I'm trying to think like if, when you have a president, like if you read, I guarantee if you read any Roosevelt, either one biography, there's some place in there where they're making connections between these people being related, or they're bringing up other famous people who are related. You're having any of these kind of things. That's not the point of the Gospels. The Gospels are not, and this is important, I think John himself said this, the Gospels are not about him. He has to decrease. He is a figure in the story of Jesus' life. The Gospel writers, parchment that they would have had to write these scrolls on is very expensive. They're not trying to write all these anecdotes, about every part of his childhood. We miss basically 30 years of his life, 29 so years of his life are totally left out. And so I think it's fun. Like we've talked about on here. We talked about it on the Family Movie Podcast, the show The Chosen.
Yep.
I think that's a fun way of kind of imagining what would his relationship be like. I think one unfortunate part of the popularity of a show like that is there are a lot of people, I think the good news is there are people who've started to reinvestigate their faith because of it. Mm-hmm. But one of the unfortunate part is I think a lot of people then take those images and go, well, that must be what it was like.
Yeah, the one thing I love The Chosen.
I love The Chosen
love
too.
The
Me too.
I watch it with my kids and I have to be very careful going, well, we don't know that's how that happened.
I love the fact that The Chosen always says these aren't actual, that they
Yes.
had to add to it. And they're trying to get people to read the actual text.
They are. So this is not a criticism of The Chosen. This
No.
is just to say, I think it's really important for us to say, hey, it's fun to imagine that. Like, what it would have been like if John the Baptist and Jesus hung out at a family function. But there's just so much that we don't know. And I think the gospel writers would say is not the point of the story.
That's right.
That Jesus is the point of the story. And so I'm not saying you did a bad job asking this question. This is what we do on this podcast. This is one of those fun things we get to do of have these conversations.
And I hope that people can get to the point. If you ask us a question, expect that we're going to give you definitive answers. There are many, many things you can get definitive answers from. There's really not a definitive answer for this.
Nope.
And it's okay to just hold that out there and decide, God doesn't want us to know that. There is an answer. Mm-hmm. There is an answer of what's going on and how we either misread the text and read ourselves into the text, or why we didn't need to know that stuff. But we just don't know. We have limited information about those things. They aren't the main point of what we have to know, so we can just...
Well, we can imagine it and have fun and lend to it, but it's not the point of that text. No. It's not, they're not Stephen King novels where you're going to have to spend 3, chapters on something in the town that has nothing to do with the main story.
Well, I wound up not too long ago now, it may be close to a year now that I think about it, having an interaction with a person that used to be a part of our church who's still, they're trying to figure out, they were part of our church when they were a kid. They're trying to figure out their faith again. And they said that, the Gospels clearly have a point of view that they're trying to get across. So can we trust it? And my point to them was, because I love biographies and I love reading them, there are no biographies that don't have a point of view.
Yes.
Whoever wrote them did all the research they needed to do. They probably they had to know a lot more than they decided to write. It's not a good biography if every detail the writer had they decided to put in.
Yes.
They had to limit it down, even if on some, there's a couple of biographies of presidents I've read that are 2 volumes.
Yeah.
But you can't put a person's whole life on
That's
the
right.
pages of a book. So you are trying to say something about the person, good or bad, in what you're writing. So there's nothing wrong in us saying they weren't included. It's not necessary. The gospel writers are trying to focus on Jesus. You have to assume that what the questions you have aren't necessary for what they wanted you to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think if anything, just allow it to be an imagination thing on your part. If you like that and just kind of think, oh, I wonder what that would be like. I think anything that allows your thoughts to rest on Jesus is helpful to you. But I think to the point we're making, it shouldn't be for the quest of finding a definitive answer. If it allows you just to sit, because I have a lot of those things. I like to think, I wonder what Jesus did with that. What was Jesus' favorite food? Because he had to have a favorite food. What was the food that someone made for Jesus that he was just upset about? My favorite question is, at the end, and I almost included this in the sermon I preached Sunday, at the end of Mark's account, because at the end of the Passover field, it says that they sing a hymn and they go. And I've always wondered, what if Jesus was a terrible singer? What if
No, we don't. No,
we
we
don't
don't.
know, because people think perfect, because people always used to say that of, I'd want Jesus on my baseball team. I wouldn't, because he never played baseball.
and
They didn't believe
we did a series of videos
We
at one
did.
point
Yeah.
about Jesus and the things that Jesus, and
Yes.
one of them was
Well,
playing
but
baseball.
one of
He
them was-
wasn't
Well, and
very good at it.
if you remember, there's an episode of The Chosen, speaking of, where they do play a game
Right.
of playing where you catch the ball,
Mhm.
and Jesus gets beat.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought it was great.
I just love the idea that all of them are sitting down and they realize it's Jesus' turn to sing the hymn. And they're all like, oh, God, please don't let him
don't
sing the
let him.
hymn. You don't get to sing. It's just bad. Let someone else lead.
Thomas, start this off.
Someone else start before he starts
Quick,
singing
start it.
again.
All right, let's don't riff on Jesus' singing voice. Okay.
Jason's defensive of him. He had a beautiful singing
Standing
voice.
up for my
He
Lord.
was operatic. I would have paid money
And
to see
boy,
him
could he
sing.
dunk the basketball.
That's right.
Air Jesus.
Kareem Abdul-Jesus.
So come back next week. We will have. We actually have another question about an incident in Scripture that somebody wants to know about. A kind of a controversial story. So we're going to get into the
There's
controversy.
plenty of those.
There are,
Yeah.
but this one is definitely controversial for a lot of Christians. We're going to talk about it next week. See ya.